Joining us now, Veterans Administration Secretary Robert Wilkie. Secretary Wilkie, great to have you, sir.
Well, it's good to be with you, John. You know, I spent several years of my youth in Hampton Roads, in the Ghent neighborhood there in Norfolk. Went to school there, and then in my Navy career was in and out of Dam Neck and Little Creek and the big naval base. So it's always nice to talk.
So, Mr. Secretary, always good to have a friend of Southeast Virginia and Hampton Roads. I know you know the area well. I wanted to get you on today to comment on President Trump's fiscal 2020 budget and how that really impacts the Veterans Administration and some of the changes you've made there. Because, you know, during the Obama administration, I think we spent a show a week blasting the VA for all the foibles going on. Tell us what's different and tell us what's in the budget.
Well, I'll tell you what's different, and it's something that you noticed 2 or 3 years ago when you were the first person to come out and endorse the president. Donald Trump's the difference.
Thank you.
He is the first candidate. He was the first president to make veterans a centerpiece of both his campaign and his administration. Mm-hmm. And we're in the middle of the greatest transformative period in the history of the department. We're opening the aperture on choice for veterans, which means that they will be in control of their own health. At the same time, we are reinforcing the things that VA does well, particularly serving those who have been wounded in combat, spinal cord, traumatic brain injuries, prosthetics. So we're in a much better place thanks to this president than VA has been really since the days of Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower.
I tell you what, the transformation at the VA has been nothing short of breathtaking since the president has taken over and since you've been there, sir, because I have to tell you, we spent week after week on the show, just one disaster after the other, from the Phoenix catastrophe on down. And, you know, now you've gotten the handle on it. And the other thing, sir, that has stopped is on our show, we would get at least twice a week, we would get callers coming in complaining about horror stories in Hampton Roads or in Richmond or other areas of the Mid-Atlantic that we cover, VA disasters where they're on a waiting list and, you know, we're just basically jerked around. Those calls, sir, have stopped.
Yeah, and a couple of things. You know, the Annals of Internal Medicine, just Dartmouth, said that our care is as good or better than any care in the country. Our waiting times now are as good or better than any in the country. And I'll tell you a basic fact that Donald Trump knows as a businessman, and that is customer service, but customer service first within the institution, because if you can't talk and walk with your workers, your fellow workers, you're not going to be able to provide customer service to those on the outside. And the president has done that.
Mr. Secretary, during the debacle of the VA that we covered for so long, one of the biggest issues for many of our veterans that were seeking care there was a waiting list. They would get on a waiting list, and it would be months before they saw anybody, and sometimes their illness would get worse. How has that been addressed, sir?
Right. Well, that's been addressed by modernizing our scheduling system, but also with the Mission Act that President Trump signed, we have said that if you live 30 minutes or more away from a VA facility, and we don't have the service that you need, you can choose to go outside of VA. The same applies for those who need a specialty service like cardiology or rheumatology. What that does is it puts the veteran at the center. So the days when wait times dominated the life and the health care of a veteran, those days are over. The other thing I want to add, particularly for your part of Virginia, is that this president's finally closed the loop on one of the last tragedies of Vietnam, in that he has now put in place support and resources for family caregivers for those who are taking care of Vietnam veterans. My father's combat generation, and that is a massive step forward and a change in the way we do medicine by getting out of these massive hospitals and getting care that's closer to home and family oriented.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We are with the Secretary of the U.S. Veterans Administration, Robert Wilkie. He has come in under the Trump administration and has made tremendous strides in the VA in both streamlining and upgrading service and care. I want you to talk a little bit about the Trump budget, which is making significant investments in your information technology and physical infrastructure. Tell us a little bit about that, sir.
Absolutely, John. The president's provided about $4.5 billion for improving our IT systems for veterans access and to improve the veterans experience, including about $370 million for IT infrastructure readiness. Let me tell you why that's important, because you sit in the heart of the highest military service per capita area in America. What we've embarked on is the creation of an electronic health record that begins the day an American walks into the military entrance processing station and is built throughout that military career, and then there's a handoff to VA. The days of people like my father carrying around an 800-page paper record, which was the only record of his service, combat service, combat wounds, injuries from jumping with the 82nd Airborne Division. Those days are gone, and the president is investing in that capability, which we are now testing up in the Pacific Northwest, and will revolutionize the way we take care of both active duty and veteran.
So the Congress passed legislation before your term, sir, that allowed you and your top executives to terminate incompetent employees or people that were not doing their job. And remember all the scandals that went on. And when it was first passed, nothing was really done. There was a couple of people that were put into retirement, but nothing really happened. Has that been utilized by your in your tenure, and how has it helped? We've
started to remove senior leaders. We've removed heads of our veteran medical centers, which is really the pinnacle of the top of the pyramid for what we do. But I will say, in any pyramid-like organization, there are much fewer people at that end than there are at the bottom, and I've been accused of not just doing that, but letting go custodial workers. Well, we have a very different world here. If somebody doesn't sweep the floor at the Department of Labor, you have a dirty floor. If somebody doesn't sweep the floor at the Norfolk VA, the outcome could be catastrophic because we're dealing with people's health. So we're holding everybody to the highest standard, but the legislation that you talked about gives me greater force when it comes to disciplining and removing senior leaders, which we've done.
And that has had a marked impact on your performance and response to veterans seeking care, right?
I think so. And give you a quick example. I'd heard that one of our hospitals' ratings had plummeted, and I decided to just walk in and see for myself. And all of the folks in your area who have military experience will know exactly what I'm about to say. At the end of the day, I knew as much about the senior staff at that hospital as the hospital medical director knew, which tells you one thing: that hospital medical director sat in the office, did not get out amongst her workforce, and allowed the workforce to atrophy and the services to atrophy. So the law allowed me to get around the usual merit service board protections and take action.
And what action, sir, were you able to take?
Remove. Yeah, remove the head of the hospital.
So you were able to fire her or dismiss her? Or
Yes.
just take her out of just fire her?
That's right.
And then put somebody else in there that would be responsible to you in turning it around.
Right.
I mean, it seems like a simple thing, right?
It is,
Mr. Secretary.
It
seems like, but it's not.
We've got personnel processes in the federal government that were put in place in the 1880s to combat what they call the spoils system.
Right.
And it's now turned on its head. It's a workforce protection system that makes it very difficult for most of my cabinet colleagues to remove employees who aren't performing.
Well, some people might call that the deep state, but in the VA, it's not a deep state. It's just incompetence that is affecting the health of our veterans. But like you say, you get back to the Department of Labor example, you would call that the deep state. We've heard so many examples of various employees like that throwing monkey wrenches into Trump administration policies, just jamming up the processes to stop it. But that is that's a conversation served for another day. We're with Secretary Robert Wilkie of the Veterans Administration. He's made tremendous strides there. 2019, I know, Secretary, you're the kind of guy that you've got very specific goals and objectives for the VA. Top two things you want to see done in 2019, sir. What are they?
Well, it is the Mission Act. It's the Trump reform to get our veterans more accessibility and to the care that they need. The law that the president signed was very specific. It is that the interest of the veteran is at the heart of what we do, not the interest, as you pointed out a minute ago, the interest of the institution. That is a sea change in the way we look at the world by not putting the institution first. The second thing that I'm all about is making sure that through things like the electronic health record that we are tied at the hip with the Department of Defense. There's absolutely no reason in an area like Norfolk that VA and DOD cannot cross-pollinate their services to make sure that we have the broadest service available for all of our veterans. So those would be the top priorities for me.
Mr. Secretary, give us an example of how DOT and VA cross-pollination would work. Like, how does that translate into better medical care for a veteran?
Sure. Give you an example. I'll just use Fort Sill, Oklahoma as an example. Fort Sill, out in the middle of Oklahoma, it's the Field Artillery School. They have an Army hospital there. We have veterans clinics throughout Oklahoma. It turned out that we had a lot more dentists that Fort Sill had. So we reached an agreement with Fort Sill. We'll give you dentists. You give us operating room space. And that's what they did. Now, General Mattis has since departed, and I will be working with whomever is his permanent replacement. I want to make sure that those procedures that we use in a place like Fort Sill are permanent so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every day. Norfolk, you have tremendous veteran support facilities, but you also have massive Naval and Air Force facilities there, and we need to help share that burden, which not only helps the military when it comes to the wait times for its dependents, but it helps us gain access to specialists that the military has that we don't.
I tell you, some of the things you're doing are just really on the cutting edge, sir. We really appreciate it. And the relationship you've got with the president, describe it.
Yes. Well, it's the best. And I'm saying that sincerely. I've said in my public statements, I said it again on Tuesday when we rolled out the suicide task force. The indication of what this president feels was when I was the acting secretary. And the acting secretary is somebody who has a title but not a lot of power. So in the 8 weeks I was here before I was officially nominated, the President of the United States spent over 8 hours with me. Talking about veterans, asking about military service. Prior to that, I'd been the Undersecretary of Defense. That showed me that this was a commitment that was deep. It was heartfelt. The notion that a president of the United States was going to spend 8 hours with anybody outside of the White House compound, I would have told you were crazy. And that's based on my previous experiences in the Bush White House. So that is the indication of where his heart is. He talks about it wherever he is, and I couldn't be prouder.
And sir, he spent that 8 hours with you before you were even nominated.
Right. That's right.
So basically, it wasn't about you being the director or you were in a position of power. It was gaining information, having a discussion on how to fix it and move forward, regardless of whether or not you ended up the VA secretary.
That's right.
Because
absolutely
no guarantee you were going to get nominated. No guarantee you'd get out of committee, and no guarantee you'd get 51 votes in the Senate either.
That's right.
Right.
Well, I'm glad he liked what he heard.
Evidently, he did, because now you're the secretary,
and it led to 86 votes in the Senate, which is not bad.
I would say 86% of anything is pretty good, right? It's like batting .860. Nobody does that. Well, good job, and
thank you.
We look forward to you coming on again regularly. You know, I've got a very robust veterans audience here on my show, and for Virginia, it's makes up a big part of our audience, sir, and we really appreciate your sharing that and the work that you've done, and you're really making a difference. Because I have to tell you, for 4 years straight, we covered the debacle going on in the VA, and the number of callers that we had a week, veterans just calling up to complain with horror stories, was just heart wrenching. And now, like they've just stopped. They just stopped.
That's right.
Callers.
Well, that's a testament to the leadership across the street there at the White House, and I look forward to seeing you when I'm in the Virginia Beach area often. So I'd love to come by the studio.
Well, sir, it's God's country.
That's right.
We'd love to have you.
Well, I thank you.
Both of us need to get out of Washington, D.C. I always say the best thing for me when I'm in D.C., the best thing about not living there is Friday afternoon when I leave. That's like the best thing. Get the hell out of town.
That's right.
Get out of the swamp.
That's right.
So thank you for being with us. Secretary, Veterans Administration, Robert Wilkie. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for the good work. You, my friends, are on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Corey Lewandowski is coming up. You know, it's kind of amazing, the Secretary outlining some of the tremendous strides he's made. But remember, longtime listeners to my show, how many days did we go over the Veterans Nightmare? I mean, just 1 week after the next. I remember times I spent like whole shows on it. And we get people calling in, giving just horrific stories about service and lines and wait lists and, you know, not finding their file and all this stuff. And the calls just stopped. It's not like we got up one day and said, all right, no more calls on Horror Story VA. They just stopped, which means the care has been better. And that goes right back to Secretary Wilkie and to President Donald J. Trump. Another promise delivered or in the works. John Fredericks Radio Network. Gotta go.